All right, and we're back. It's COMP392. It's the winter 2016 session, week 4, lesson 4, part 5 of our broadcast. Let's talk about this thing a little bit. What I was talking about just now was assignment 2, right, which is the solar system assignment, right? So there's some interesting new challenges you've been given. Let's see how you handle them. Let's kick off. I want to bring up Blender, not because I want to do Blender work today so much necessarily, but to kind of describe things like lighting a little bit more, right? Because we've talked at length about some basics like materials. You should understand what a material is to some degree now, right? That it's a wrapper that wraps around your shape or your mesh. That's what it is, right? You should understand something about cameras, because last day we talked about, and by the way, it'll probably be on your next little test, right? We talked about cameras, both orthographic cameras and perspective cameras, and the difference between the two, right? So we talked about that. We haven't really talked about lighting, yeah. Which one? Oh, the persistence of vision. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's see what that is. If you looked up persistence of vision, and this is kind of neat, persistence, right, of vision. If you looked that up and actually did a Wikipedia hunt on it, right, it really, like it says, refers to the optical illusion whereby multiple discrete images blend into a single image. It's not bad in the human mind. And the reason for that is because we have almost like a frame rate ourselves, right? Our cameras, our natural cameras, our eyes, see life in terms of a certain frame rate. They refresh every so often. And usually you can fool our eyes somewhere around 24 frames per second. Okay, so if you're like 24 frames per second, I'm talking about 24 page flips in a second, it looks like animation, all right? It looks like something is moving naturally, right? The higher rate of animation, 30 frames and up, looks a lot smoother. So there's less jerkiness around it. But you can get off with doing 24 frames animation. By the way, most of Disney's work, like the old Disney animation that you would see out there, like for example, something like Little Mermaid or something like that, right? Or name some other movies that were out there in the past, like Sleeping Beauty and those kind of things. They were all maximum about 24 frames per second, okay? So if they can do animation like that, then certainly we can make video games like around 30 frames per second and fool the human eye, right? And if I was to look this through, if I was going to look at persistence of vision just here on Wikipedia, it gives you some really cool examples. One thing to note would be something like, for example, a persistence of vision of a bee. So if I go persistence of vision of a bee, right? Or or a wasp of some kind, right? There might be some more examples of that in terms of how a bee or a wasp has a lot higher, like insects, as an example, have higher persistence of vision than humans. So they can actually see more frames per second, and so it looks like more of a jerky motion. Especially think about a fly's eye. How many actual facets a fly's eye has? Many facets, right? So whether you're a fly or a bee, and that's why it's so hard to catch a fly or to hit a fly, because you can see mostly almost in 360 degrees, right? So a bigger field of view for a fly, right? So it's harder to surprise. And same thing with a spider, and same thing with other things as well, other kinds of insects, right? They have a different eye shape, a camera shape than we do, more of a spider eye or a fly eye kind of lens. The idea of fish eyes, the whole idea of fish eye being a very much more curved view of how things work. Think about how they see the world, right? We see the world forward because our faces are made because we're primates, right? In some ways, we come from primates. We're humans, right? We see the world in front of us, right? And some animals, for example, fish, they have an eye on the side of their head. Same thing with birds, fish, reptiles. They have an eye on the side of their head. And what they do is they combine their vision a little bit differently than us, so they have a different view on reality. So we're talking about our, not just persistence of vision, but our perspective, right? So when we see the world, we see it in a certain way. For the most part, if you have two eyes, you see things in a certain way, and that's what we get when we see a perspective camera, for the most part. Now, unless you're visually challenged in some other ways, and some of us may be in some ways, right? You will see this shape as more realistic than a shape that's an orthographic view. Does that answer your question, Ryan? So persistence of vision is how our mind puts the images together and how our eyes refresh the world, if you will, right? It's our, our filter, how we see things, right? Besides our experience. Of course, our experience colors everything too. And I'm not going to go into that. And as an aside, imagine if you go to a place twice, right? You go to the first time when you're younger, right? And then the second time when you're older. That's a different thing we're talking about. That's an experience filter, right? So when you're young, you don't understand really what you're seeing. And as you're older and you grow, then your mind understands what you're seeing a lot more, right? For the most part. And so now that place seems to be new, like things have changed, but really the place has never changed. It's just you. Okay? A little bit of philosophy there thrown into the pot. Why not? All right? Okay, let's go back to reality now and talk about Blender and how we're going to talk about this stuff here. So again, I'm going to use my numeric keypad here. So if you have a keyboard with a numeric keypad, or if you can change Blender's view to use the numeric keypad, on your Mac a little differently, or PC, that's fine. I'm using this so that it gives me some hotkeys, so I can use the numeric keypad to zoom in and out of different perspectives. So let's get rid of our cube. I'm going to right-click on my cube to get rid of it and press the X button. So I'm killing my cube. Yay! I want to make my sun, like we talked about before, right? And I'm going to add in my sun with Shift A. I'm going to add a new mesh. And you know what? In this particular example, I want to kind of add in a UV sphere because that makes more sense in this example. So UV sphere. Notice on the left, when you add a UV sphere on the left here, I have a certain amount of segments. I have 32 segments and 16 rings. What I want to do to make this as smooth ball as I can is kind of change the rings to 32 as well. You don't have to do this, but you certainly can. Cool, there's our sphere. We have 32 rings by 32 rings. Now this sphere could be the planet that we're talking about, right? Or it could be the sun. Let's make it the sun because it's in the center of our universe right now, right? A sun-centric universe, right? The sun is the center of the universe, right? Not the galaxy. The galaxy doesn't exist for our world. It's just the sun, right? And let's make it a sun. So how would we make it a sun? What's the first thing you guys would do? And this is a bit of a review to make this thing a sun, right? Look like a sun. Change the color. If I want to change the color, I need to add a material. If I can't do color without material, right? So that's the first thing I need to do. Let's just do that. So I'm going to go into my material tab over here on the right. And then notice that there's no material. I'm going to click new to add a material. Yay, cool. Let's change the material. And we're just going to change it to, I'm going to make my sun yellow, right? Now you can make your sun red, like Superman's sun, right, if you want to, right? But my sun is going to be yellow. So I'm going to say yellow. And I'm going to paint a nice bright yellow sun, right? So I'm going to click in the diffuse area here. And again, if you're using Unity or some other kind of game framework, you're going to see it's going to be called albedo, right? For me, I'm using this. I'm going to pull this right down until we get to the, kind of a brighter yellow color. If I want to get from a golden yellow, though, to a real yellow, again, I could go hexadecimal, right? And I could do the exact yellow color, which is, how do I get real, as yellow, yellow, yellow as much as possible? What's the true yellow if I was going to do with hexadecimal values? Green and blue, right? So there's no red, right? I don't know. Is that yellow? How do I get yellow, right? How do I get truly? What's my values for yellow? Let's try and go into more of this spectrum over here, right? So as I go towards the yellowish spectrum and I increase the brightness here, there we go. Look what I'm getting. It's almost FF00, which is what yellow should look like. So if I change this to F, right? And that's what the value is hexadecimal wise, FFFF00, right? So red and green put together, right? And then we get more of that yellowish color. All right, cool. So that's the first, what we're going to use. We're going to use a Lambert material, right? A Lambert material. Is the sun going to be reflective? Probably not, right? So I don't need to do that. In fact, just to make it so that it's interesting, I want you to choose something else. Notice how I want to make this thing an emitter, right? Now, and there's different ways of doing this in 3JS, but in Blender, I want to make this an emitter. And notice under shading, right here under the material, I want to click shadeless. Click shadeless for me. Okay, cool. And if I zoom in, so I'm zooming into the thing, I can see that my sphere is here. And I can choose shadeless means that it's not going to generate any kind of shadows. So if I cast shadows on it, it's going to be perfectly like this. Now this is kind of not smooth. For me to make it smooth, on the left-hand side here, you see that there's different options. One of them is under shading, under the transform window, you see smooth. Click smooth. Yay, it's a smooth sphere. If I take it away from shadeless for a second, let's just take this away, get rid of the shadeless, and put it back. And I can actually make it emit. So if I click emit under shading, I drag it over, I can make it so that it emits light, right? Almost like an object that emits light. Now there's a different way to do this in Blender, or in 3GS, but notice how I can turn up this object so it looks like it's emitting light, right? So I don't care so much about specularity. I mean, it's going to change my color a little bit from, you know, from a shadow perspective and so on, if I want to. But really, what I want to do is turn up the emission, make it really bright. So this is definitely one way to do it. What's another way to make it, you know, make the sun? If I was going to do in 3GS, is there a way to make material emit light in 3GS? And that's the question I would have it do. Or maybe what you want to do is create a point lamp or some other kind of lamp. What kind of lamps do we have in 3GS? We have a point lamp. We have a directional light. We have a spotlight. Can't be a spotlight because a spotlight is going to be like, it's really bright. We also have a hemisphere, a hemi, right? All those kind of lights as well. So we definitely have different kinds of lights we're going to use. For now, let's just leave it at this, as if the sun is transmitting or emitting light. I'm going to put it at the maximum amount, so we're going to make it as a very bright object, like 2. There we go. If I look at this and I render the scene, if I go back to my camera here, which is the leftmost tab, and I click render, or press Control Enter or Command Enter, right, to kick this off, notice that it's pretty bright, right? Now we don't have any other objects to look at, but you know, as an example, the sun itself is kind of the center of our world. Let's press Escape. Okay, so that's our sun. Now it's not very big, right? My ask of you is try and think about what the sun would really look like. I mean, compared to the Earth, the sun is the biggest object in the solar system, right? So you'd probably want to make the sun pretty darn big, right? Like I'm talking about at least 10 times larger than any planet, right? At least something like that, just for your scale. Should be like 100 times or 1,000 times larger. But for a realistic perspective, we're not going to be able to see it all if you make it too big, right? So let's make it like small sun, right? So that's just representative. It's not exactly to scale. That's another thing I'm not asking for. I'm not asking for in your assignment 2 to make everything to scale. That's going to mess you up. Please don't try that. That's you know, it's nuts. It's nuts to do. Let's make it bigger. So how do I do that? I'm going to press the N key, and if you notice my there's a scale. I'm going to just change the scale here to 10. So 10 for the X. I'm just going to warp for a second, and then 10 for the Y, and then 10 for the Z. So it's massive, right? And if I zoom out now, you can see that the sphere takes up my entire grid, right? That's pretty big. Now if I added another object, let's add another object. And notice also one more thing. My camera is right in there, right? Like it's right inside the same area as my sun. So if I click on my camera, I'm going to have to move that out, right? So if I want to see my sun, here's my camera now. What I might want to do is I might want to use view, align camera to view, right? So I want to align my camera to view for a second. So if I want to get this view for my sun, right? Align active camera to view, which is Control Alt Numpad 0. That's where my camera is now. And if, you know, I highly recommend here to click on Lock Camera to View and the N with the N key and kind of scroll out even more, right? Just to make it so that I can see my sun. All right, so there's my sun. It's way back here. My camera's way removed from out here. I notice I can still see it because it's emitting light of its own, right? Still going to have to add additional lights because we won't be able to see this scene. You'll see the difficulties from doing this thing. And if it's difficult for me to do it in Blender, then it might be difficult to do it in 3GS, right? Okay, cool. Here's my lamp, and my lamp is inside the sun. If I move that out, I can see that my lamp, I mean, this is just a point lamp that I have in here. If I zoom in, so if I zoom into my point lamp, and again, I'm just going to click, you know, zoom in so I can see it. By the way, I'm zooming my camera in, and that would be bad Let me just zoom back out again. Yay, Tom. Okay. I've just put my camera to the side. Let's click lock camera to view again to unlock the camera so that I can actually zoom into my view a little bit more carefully. So there's my sun, there's my camera. Notice how my lamp. My lamp, if I put it inside my sun, right, back to where it was, so it's inside, physically sitting inside. And if I want to look at it, here's the top view, and I'm going to go into orthographic view for a second, right? Here's my orthographic view. I'm pressing the shift key and scrolling out here. I can put the emitter right in the middle of the view if I want to, by hand. There's other ways to do it automatically. I'm just using different views here to kind of center my emitter. This is my light here. I could do this as well. And I could change my point lamp. My energy is really low right now. And it's kind of, what it's doing is it's illuminating the inside of this thing. So if I was to actually go into my sun, right? And it's hard to see because I've got to zoom into the actual camera itself. There it is, or this is my lamp, right? Notice how I'm inside my sun, but you can't tell because it's all yellow, right? So one technique is don't make it completely yellow and emissive like this, right? Make it semi-transparent, right? So I'm going to come out again and click on my actual material for my sphere, my sun. Let's rename it out here just to make it so it's unique. So inside my outliner, which would be like your hierarchy in Blender or in Unity, or you know, in other systems, there's some kind of hierarchy or outline. So in here, I'm going to just call this thing the sun. Here it is. And over here under my material, let's take away the emission for a second and just try something different, right? So notice under my shading, I have emit at 2, right? So I'm going to pull that right back down to 0, right? So it doesn't emit any light. And instead of making it so that it's like this, I'm going to increase my translucency, which is my transparency, up like halfway. Let's see if I can go to more of a transparent type shape. Or if I click transparency, might be the other way to do it. So if I click Z transparency, notice here, my alpha is 1, right? Let's drop my alpha down so that it's about half, so 0.5. So this is effectively making my sun see-through, right? Again, it's just a trick, right? But this is one way to do it. Still specular and all that kind of stuff. Notice that my Z transparency is really low. My translucency is 0. I could make this so that it's 100 as well, but let's just leave it 1 at a time because you'll see the difference in here, right? Okay, cool. So now I can make my light, if I click on my lamp, which is in the middle, I can make this really bright. I can increase the energy level. So I can make it so that my lamp is much brighter, right? So let's make it so it's like a brightness of like, I don't know, 10, right? And now, remember, we're seeing this in solid mode. Let's go to material mode for a second. There's material, right? Notice how I can see my plane again, because my plane, right, this is transparent, and that's how I can see this thing, right? I'm also looking at it from a orthographic view as opposed to a perspective view, right? So here's my perspective view. Hey, how come half of my sun is black, right, from my camera? How come? How come? Anybody have an idea? Light's inside, right? But it's still transparent, so I can see the light. Let's increase the light in terms of magnitude even more. So let's go into like, I don't know, 100, right? Something brighter. Notice that it becomes a little brighter, but still is hidden from our eyes, right? The more we make things transparent, so if I go back to my sun, and if I go down here and notice how it becomes this different pattern here that I'm seeing, right? The more I make it transparent for me, right? So here's under shading, I have my transparency on. And if I make this go to like more transparent, the more transparent it becomes, right, for my object, the more I'm able to see my light that's inside. But here's a problem. Does the point lamp really do what I want it to do, right? Does it produce shadows, right? And who knows what lamps produce shadows in 3GS and what they don't. Spotlight definitely produces shadows, right? Directional light definitely produces shadows. But directional light means it's only going in one direction, right? And do I have a directional lamp that's here available to me in Blender to test with? No. I do have a Hemi though, right? And they do have kind of those hemispheric lamps in Blender as well. This is a preview of what my shape will look like. Not that bright, right? Not that bright at all. So this is one of the challenges we're going to have. The sun has to kind of emit our light for us. And if I move this shape out, right, so here's our shape. I'm just going to undo that. Let me move the lamp out for a second. Here's our lamp. If I move the lamp out, you can see how my sun is almost very, not only transparent, but almost reflective. So I need to fix that. Here's the lamp that's right here, and I'm getting this reflection right here. It can't be reflective at all. My sun has to have zero specularity, right, pretty much. So let's go back to my sun and change my specularity, right? And by clicking on this one right here, let's go back to, not the world. I'm looking at camera too. Sun, and I'm clicking on material, and I want to click my specularity down to like 0. So there's no reflectivity, because that kind of looks weird. Right, so you see that there's no shadows being cast from our lamp. Here's our lamp, and as I bring it closer, you can see that I'm getting a bit of some weird effect on it. You'll get the same effect with 3JS, by the way, if you do this, right, with a point lamp. So let's change our point lamp from a point lamp, which illuminates nicely, and this is really far away as well. How many units do you figure that we're out? We're definitely out more than 100 units, right? And remember, after 100 units, our camera starts culling information, starts missing information between the near plane and the far plane. Hint, hint. I'm saying near plane, far plane again because I want to test you on it, right? The near plane is how close I have to be to start killing information close up, and the far plane is how far we can see way far away, right? Near plane and far plane. So my camera might be starting to cull the information beyond a certain point anyway. So we have to kind of modify my camera as well. So let me go back to my camera. And let's change my start. The start should be 1, but let's say change my end and make it like Blender, or like 3JS. Let's make it to 1000 and press enter. So that means for sure when we render the scene, it'll still be within the scene that we render. Let's go back to our camera view by pressing the 0 button on the numpad, right? So this is really what we're seeing, which is kind of like a transparent sun with this. It's not really quite capturing what we want to do, right? So we have to kind of make it so that this lamp is a different kind of lamp than this point lamp. Let's try, and these are different point lamps that they have here. We have our sun lamp. You can try that one, right? And again, look what it says. It's constant direction, parallel ray light source. That's like our directional light, our directional lamp in 3JS. This is what this is, the sun lamp. Let's try this out. If I put that in there, and if I put my lamp inside of my sun again, notice that I have a lot of energy here, right? I can increase this energy. We're at 100%. There's nothing more we can do with this energy level. I mean, it's not really casting any light outside of this object because it's in the object itself, right? Okay, so that's one. Let's try a couple other things. Here's a spot lamp, right? So spotlight comes right out of the sun. That's not really what we want either. Here's the Hemi. The Hemi kind of lights up the sun from the inside. And here's an area. An area lamp just lights up the lamp inside the sun again. An area that's lighting up, right? So some of the same things that we have here are mirrored in 3JS. For sure, a point lamp, right? An area lamp, which is like an ambient light, right? The directional lamp, which is a sun spotlight, and a Hemi. Those are all there that are in the part of 3JS as well. So does anyone have a proposition? Some ways of making the sun glow as if it's its own light source. Anybody? And again, there's different ways of doing this. If you use a different rendering mode, I'm using Blender render. It has limitations. If I go to a cycles render, you'll see more of a light source. I can make it so that the plane is a light source. But for now, is there any way that you recommend to make the sun look like a sun, even though it's a sphere? So the first way we did it was pretty cool, right? Because we made it emit, right? But it really didn't emit any light. Not really. Which I've done, right? So that doesn't do it because even though I'm transparent, it only shines certain things outside of the light source. Which I kind of have, which I did when I did the emission. If I go back to clicking the sun, right? And if I go to emission, right? So under shading, emit, and if I turn the emission right up, I can make it so that it emits light, right? And that's what it would look like right now because it's semi-transparent. If I take the transparency away, it's going to look just like that again, like we had it before, right? And if I render it, if I change modes from material to rendered, right? Here's what it's going to look like rendered. If I go into, from a shading perspective, I want to change my shading type from multi-texture to GLSL. That's going to give us some more realistic shading, right? All right, so we see the sun. This is kind of a fast and dirty way of seeing it rendered as I'm moving it around, right, in 3D space. Notice that there is kind of like this really weird shadow, and you are able to look around through it. If I click the transparency off, you're going to see that it's just this bright yellow object, but does it cast shadows? We don't know. Let's have another shape, because I think I'm getting bored with the sun, right? The sun is kind of boring for me, right? Let's add a shape, and we'll put it away from the sun and make it like a rock-like, so something that's a little darker, maybe a little bit more of a blue color, right? Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to say Shift A. I'm going to add in another object, which is a UV sphere. Here it is. And I'm going to pull this sphere immediately out, right? So as I zoom into it, let's go back from a rendering perspective into solid mode. There it is. I'm going to pull this sphere out. Now it becomes that small, and that's okay. Because remember, we made it 10 times or 100 times bigger than a regular object. I think it was what we made it, right? Because let me just take a look at the object, the sun. The sun itself is so far 10 times bigger than a regular object. That's not really that big. It's not really realistic either, but it gives us scale a little bit. So this is our sphere. Let's zoom into that sphere, right? So I'm going to press 0. Oops. Press the dot to zoom in. So I need to make some changes to the sphere again, just like we did before, right? I didn't add the extra rings or or divisions. Let's just click smooth, right? Which kind of almost does the same thing. My sun's a little bit smoother. Okay, let's add a new material. So I'm going to go here to the 4th tab again from the right and add a new material, and we're going to call this blue. I'll make it a kind of a dark blue or whatever. Blue. There we go, like a blue planet. Hint, hint. What could be a blue planet? Earth. I'm not going to make it specular. Let's take away our specularity, and we'll make it more diffuse, but more of a blue, like a light blue color. There we go. It's kind of like what the Earth might look like, right? And if you want to match what my color looks like, I'm kind of choosing a 00C7E7. Not sure if that's really accurate, but just choosing one color, right? I can make it a little darker or not. All right, there's our sphere. And from an illumination perspective, where are we getting our light source from? We're getting our light source right now from this object, right? Our sun. It is illuminating. If it wasn't illuminating, it would be black, right? If there wasn't any sun. If there wasn't any sun at all, if I was to make this sun so it doesn't illuminate, let me just click on, first of all, let's just call this Planet 1. Planet 1. There we go. Here's Planet 1 with a blue material, right? If I go back to my sun here, click on sun, and if I change this from emitting at 2 to not emitting, right? Does it really change anything here? Well, not in solid mode. In solid mode, it looks exactly the same. But if I move into like a material mode, it's black. This is what you would see, because there is no light illuminating it in material mode, right? There's no light that's illuminating it. So if I go back to material mode, here's material. There's no light. That means that sphere is black. If I change back to emission, so I'm still highlighting my sun, and I'm changing it back to emission. Let's see what it does. So kind of emit everything. Do I see any light on this object? Right. So if I zoom into this object, is there any light? Even though I'm emitting, the answer is no. Right. So I don't see any light, and that's what you'd see if you try to render your scene with an emitting material, like for example the sun's material in Blender Render. Right. Okay. If I make it so that it's, even if I make it fully transparent, so if I make my alpha 0, right, fully transparent, and even if I have my lamp, my light source that's inside of my fully transparent object, really bright, like an area or a hemi, right, unless I go into something like a sun, take a look at the sun, here it is, right, so sun or hemi would do it for me, right, notice how hemi illuminates it with the blue. Like if I go into there, you can see that I'm getting, it's really bright, like my energy level is like 100, right? With a hemi or with a sun. If I go to sun, I get a bit of shadowing going on, right? With our sun. Why is that? And is the sun accurate? Look how it's looking. It's a directional lamp, right? So if I want to kind of shine the sun in a certain way, I have to kind of angle it. I can change my my angle so it kind of points at my planet to kind of create, at least from one perspective, right, a bit of shadow, right? And that's realistic. You'll get half the planet in shadow, and the other half of the planet in light. Now I'm fully transparent here for me to do that. You can't even see my object, my sun at all. Here it is. If I make this less transparent, so if I change my transparency, so I put my alpha to 50%, I mean, it's still going to affect the color of my object, but less so. Right? Here's less so. Here's what you're going to see. So you still see this blue planet. It's quite bright because I've got this other lamp, which happens to be a sun lamp that's of 100% energy. If I want to bring this down, because I'm pretty close, I can bring this down so that it's, instead of 100, I'll bring this down to like 50. You know, even that's too bright for how big it is. Let's go even down to 10, right? You can see that that's a little better, 10 energy. Still quite bright, but you still see a little bit more illumination. The sun looks wacko. That's the only thing that I don't like about is the sun itself looks kind of whack. It's not bright. It's not a bright thing to look at, right? The thing that fixes it again is if I go with that, if I click on the sun itself and make it so that it's emitting, shadeless. If I make it shadeless, then it's a little bit brighter. And when I render it, I render the scene, it kind of looks like this, right? Now that's not accurate, and it's not accurate because I remember where my camera is. My camera, right, is at a point where the angle for what the sun looks like is there's a specific angle that my sun lamp, my directional lamp, is pointing at. I need a lamp that goes in all directions and casts shadows. That's what I want, right? To make it more realistic. Let's try that again. So I go back to my lamp, right, and I press escape first of all. It looks okay from here, but when I tried it out, it's not right. So let's try a Hemi. Hemi gives me more shadows or more light, but illuminates maybe too much. Let's take a look at what it looks like when it's rendered. So it's rendered. Well, there's a bit of shadow, right, just on the back over here, but it's still so bright that it illuminates most of my objects. It should be kind of half in shadow and half in sun. Now we're pretty close to each other too, so that make a difference because this whole object is shining down on this one. The farther the object away is away, the different kind of lighting you're going to get. All right. Let's press escape again, and then we'll take a short break for this exercise. And I'm trying to show you this because it's easier than you think. It's just a lot harder than you think when you're trying to make an object with a sun, like making a sun type object. Lighting is very challenging, right? So if I move this thing away, and if I looked at it from the front plane, so I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit, and I'm trying to make it from an orthographic view. It's quite close orthographically, right? If I move it away, we'll make it some units away. Here it is. Across the x-axis, and on the y-axis, if I was to look at the top, as an example, we can see that it's kind of in the way off here, over here. If I move it to right on top of the x-axis there, this is one thing you can do. If I press the number 3, I go to the side, and you can see that I'm looking at it. It's kind of right in front of the sun. So if I press the 1 button on the numeric keypad, it looks from the front. The 7 button looks from the top, and the 3 button looks from the right side, right? Right ortho. If I go back to perspective view, right? Here's my perspective view in 3-dimensional space. And now if I look at my camera, and if I want my camera to look at it like this, I've got to align my camera to view. My camera's way over here. If I press my camera view, this is what it will see right now. I won't even see my planet, right? So in order for my camera to see, I've got to move it over where I'm looking. I'm just changing perspective again, right? So I'm going to align my camera to view, align active camera to view. There it is. And what I want to do, like I said, is lock that camera to view again so I can zoom out just a little bit more so I can see my existing solar system the way it is. There we go. And then unlock it. Right, so if I keep it locked in, it'll be bad. Let's try this again. So let's render it and see what we get now. Okay, cool. I get a shape, but it's fully illuminated, and that's not what I want. I want shadows. So what's the trick? When we come back from break, let's take a 5-minute break, and let's see if one of you can come up with a solution. How I can get a good, some good shadows in place, right? Depending on no matter where I am, because the sun kind of shines in all directions, right? But I also want it to kind of receive shadows or send shadows out. And what are the lamps? We have to review which lamps send shadows and which lamps don't. And I'll bring up a PowerPoint to kind of show you what it does in 3JS.